All right, well, I am going to go ahead and share the screen and we'll get started on listing language for the savvy seller. What we are going to do is at least record this one. I'm going to post it on the Dothan Real Estate Careers page and on the mastermind group. So those who are out running around can come back to it. But this is something that my real estate coach, Dave Clark, gave me. It's a program that was developed with Debbie DeGroat's company, along with Alan Dalton, who is now on the corporate team with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And if you've ever seen him at sales convention, he is just really an expert in language of saying the right things. And so I think that's really exciting when you get to hear him. He has a lot to say about neurolinguistics. I really like even that terminology. And there's actually a whole session we can do down the road specifically on neurolinguistics. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So listing language 2.0 for the savvy seller. So the flow of this, we're going to be going through establishing rapport up front during the marketing proposal process. We're going to talk about breaking the pact and what the pact is. We're going to talk about selling yourself by demonstrating how you're going to help the client. We're going to go through best practices for determining the list price and reviewing market data. And we're going to be talking about preventing the feectomy and preventing taking those commission cuts. So just some language for all of those things. So and I've heard Alan say this many times, but many consumers have developed antibodies for most of the approaches that the industry has fashioned over the last several decades, meaning there's certain language and terminology cliches that consumers expect from real estate professionals. And so those things we have to overcome and really wow the client with the unexpected. They like to use the word mesmerized. This is exactly how we'd all love to have sellers and prospects feel, right? Mesmerized. When is the last time you have felt mesmerized? Who'd like to share? Think of a time you've been mesmerized.
So most recently for me was all the extra features in my car. It wasn't when I bought it that I was mesmerized by it, but back when I first looked at it in June. So it's all those extra little details that you probably really don't need, but that are the wow factor. And I think the same can be said for a listing presentation.
That's right. This morning for me, as an example, I was working with new clients to make sure they were excited about their home coming online. And so it was just really some extra attention to the photos and the order and the presentation to them and making sure it's all pulled together and then communicating it to them in a way that got them excited. And I am equally excited when they start texting me back, wow, that looks amazing. Oh, it looks so good. That gets me excited too. Disney's one of the classic references, right, to being mesmerized, having that Disney level experience where everything is above and beyond. All right, so another thing to approach your listing appointment, which if we want to call them a listing appointment, that's one of those industry cliches and industry terminology that we use too often. But you do want to approach it from a casually assumptive stance that you have the listing. And if you really go in there treating it like it's going to be a job interview, you're going to react a different way and make the appointment more about you than you are making it about them, the consumer. Because in an interview, you're really, trying to sell you, whereas what we really want to do is mesmerize the customer with the service we're going to provide to them and how we're going to help them. And a lot of that requires really listening to them. But you want to go in with confidence, and confidence is super key. So we're going to talk about the power walk and the importance of that pre-listing appointment. So being assumptive that you have the listing, we're going to ask the seller to have, even a key ready or key features of the house ready when we first come and meet. So and in just a casual manner, just preparing them for the things that you'll need them to have ready when you come for the appointment. Other things you want to have ready are like the listing agreement. You want to go to an appointment prepared with the full listing agreement with everything you could possibly fill out ahead of time already filled out. That will make it a much smoother process as if you find that window where they're ready to sign on the dotted line, you're not going to sit there for an hour and do the admin prep work to get that paperwork ready for them to sign. You're going to turn it over to them and say, well, let's fill in where are we going to start on price, fill in the blank, and get them to sign your listing agreement. So let's talk about the power walk. So things to have with you when you show up to your first appointment. And we strongly encourage the 2-appointment process. And the primary reason we do this, and I tell the listing prospects this every time, is you would not want me to come to your house with a predetermined price range or an amount that we could sell your house for. And I've never seen it in the features of the house. Right? I think that would be too presumptive and even just rude to value someone's home and you've never seen inside, right? And so I tell them it's important to have that first meeting. What I also do, though, is make sure they understand that first meeting is super easy because it doesn't take long to look at a house, right, and ask key questions. So this first appointment, we could have as short as a 15-minute visit where I can get some key details of the property, their goals, and get eyes on any suggestions of things that would help us market the property more effectively on day one. And so that meeting can be short. What's also super key about that, having 2 separate appointments, is you want to be quick about turning that around and having that second appointment. You don't want to put them off for too long. And most important is that you at least leave that first appointment already having scheduled the second appointment. You know when you're going to go back and review that marketing proposal with them. So things to take with you: the property record card from the tax records. You want to take that with you. I typically print, and I'm going to come off the PowerPoint slide just to show you the few things here. So I'll pull the address in the MLS and I will print every history of that property having ever sold in the MLS. So you get a lot of information about dates of improvements and ages of things and historic activity on the house. So I just plug in the address and pull it up. Then you're going to pull up the tax record and pull the property record card. And then I also print the sketch. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, it just helps you get a better idea of the layout of the home. And 2, it helps you look for discrepancies because the tax records is not always king of how big a house is. And if you can have an idea of what the tax records and how they're coming up with the square footage in the tax records, you can know whether or not you need to address any discrepancies in conversation, and perhaps even suggest you have the home professionally measured by an appraiser if they don't have a copy of a previous appraisal on file. So just things you really want to look for. So I print those, I staple them together, and I go to this first appointment with that information in hand. So let's talk about the power walk. From current slide. Marketing begins at the curb. When you pull up to this appointment, the first thing you want to do is get out of the car and stop and look at the house and start taking mental notes and physical notes on your paper. What I do with the papers I bring, that is my notepad for all of the information I'm going to collect from the owner. So I intend to take a lot of notes. What this also does is the owner is going to see you taking your time and taking their property in as they see you approach the house. So you're not running to the door to go ahead and talk to them. Stop and take a look at the house. Go ahead and take your exterior photo. When you get out of the car, stop and take your main photo that you're going to use for your marketing proposal. Make notes of things like a lot of times I see that maybe the yard needs to be cut, or they need extra pine straw in the flower bed, or they need to pressure wash a walkway or potentially even clean a roof. Does the house have gutters? Does the house have improved exterior features? You want to start making notes of all of those things that would be selling points before you ever make it to the front door. And what's great about that, if you've already done that assessment, is as you start to talk to the owner, you can layer in those observations that you've already made. A lot of times in conversation later in the proposal, you may bring up the fact you noticed they already had gutters, or that their roof looks like it's been replaced. What year was that installed? That you noticed they had a newer than 1970 roof if it's an older house. Those kind of things that they'll appreciate that you notice. And you want to be able to make those verbal suggestions on, things that are going to improve the house. And you want to make it in a comparison way where we're not talking about if we get a showing or if you list with me or if we find a buyer for the home, but when. So you're making verbal suggestions to prepare them for when the home comes online, it looks its best. When we get a showing, it shows best for the prospective buyers. Why don't we, so this is the question you want to ask when you first get to the door. You want to start this process with, why don't we take a pre-marketing evaluation tour of your property together? This may be too formal of a question, but regardless, you want to start with that property tour because it's going to get them talking about their property, you making notes, and you can really start gauging how the interaction is going to go with that client as well as what things are important to them. What percentage of homeowners, when you tour the property with them, point out improvements? If they start showing you their home, how often do they start pointing out the improvements?
Immediately.
That's right. So you want to be in full listening mode and you want to let them tell you their story of the property. So let's talk about the seller's pact. One thing you want to be mindful of at your appointments is the pact. And the pact, according to this plan, is the agreement a selling couple may make prior to your visit that they're not going to make any decisions about listing until they have time to talk about your services, or perhaps they're even interviewing other agents after your visit. So the seller's pact is that agreement that they're not going to decide right now. Have you ever made that pact with yourself even, or as a couple, say buying a car or making a big purchase or whatever? We're not going to make any decision here at the dealership. We're going to go home and talk about it and come back. I make that pact all the time. But you want to be aware of that pact because you also want to be prepared to break that pact if at all possible. You need to be prepared to be the person who says, let's start the engines, meaning, you're there for a reason. You need to be able to help them get the show on the road and be able to speak with active language that's going to move them forward. Using language that talks about pricing. You want to be able to talk about, you've brought information that will help us determine a pricing strategy and details of our marketing plan. You want to talk about that because you don't want to say it in a way that you've brought a suggested price. You've brought information that will help us determine a pricing strategy. Would you agree that there's more than one pricing strategy? You may not know right away what that seller's pricing strategy is based on their urgency. So that's one of the things you want to get to. So ask the seller, do you prefer to review the marketing proposal first or go straight to the price discussion? This is a big one. Personalities are different. Some people want the dog and pony show up front. Some are very anxious to get to the details on what you're suggesting on price. As a rule of thumb, I prefer to talk price first. And I made this change probably a few years into giving these marketing proposals, and it's because I started to sense almost every time how anxious they were to talk turkey about at least price. That's what they're most concerned about when you come a lot of times is, what are we thinking we could sell this property for? And then once we're able to get through that piece, they're more able to listen to what things we're going to do to help them market the property. Now, that may not be every case, and so it's okay to ask directly which order they'd like to go in. And you can use Toolkit CMA to control the order of those documents if they give you a preference. The other thing is to be super sensitive during the appointment on, where they are with their attention span and what they're wanting you to cover. A lot of times an agent can be very stuck on presenting it this way. I have to go in this order. I have to read all the information on this page. You want to make sure that you're reading the situation so that if they're moving at a different pace than you, you can react accordingly and cut to the chase. There's been a lot of times where you may be so diligently going page by page through the marketing proposal, and your client's across from you getting antsy about, is this person going to go ahead and tell me what my house is worth? And if you get to the point where they actually cut you off and say that directly, you probably waited too long to read that coming from the other side, right? So it's just something to be super aware of. And that's where, again, you must be very skillful and sensitive to the information that they're giving you. And here's another example. So you're walking through the house and they're talking about different features of the home. You may be jumping into recommendation mode and ready to walk through the house and say, you need to change this, you need to change this, you need to change this. Well, this thing you may be launching out with that they need to change may be something they put a lot of elbow grease, personal effort into, family history, something that's a little more sensitive to them. You need to be in a position where you're listening well enough to not step on your own toes by suggesting an improvement or a modification to something that could be sensitive to them. Let's just say you don't go straight in and tell them to paint over all of the height marks they put on their kitchen door. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's just not the way you want to approach that. And that's because there is a lot of emotion around selling a home. And a lot of times owners don't see some of the things that impacts of the home from them just living in it, because they're all experiential things. So we've got to be the calm in the room. We need to read their emotion, and we have to allow them to tell their story about the home. So, and respect their personal experiences with the home. You want to be prepared to tell the owners how you are different. So knowing our marketing campaign, knowing how their property is going to be showcased online, knowing those intimate details of the things we do to promote our listings are things you want to be able to articulate at those appointments. Being able to articulate how you can help them prepare their home. When you have that skill of helping them with suggestions on things to move out of the way, things to do light staging. If you are doing like a Kim Lee and really can help them whip the home into cute shape, even if it's completely empty, you want to be able to articulate those things. So let's read this. I don't compete against other agents here, but your home competes against other properties. This kind of goes back to the assumptive mindset about, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, sorry. I said, I like that.
Yes. So and this is completely true. We do not just compete against other agents. We work cooperatively with other agents every day. Is that right? Mm. So when you go into this listing presentation, they may be interviewing another agent, but it doesn't mean you have to feel like you're competing directly with that other agent. You're presenting yourself and your services in the best way you know how. And if they go forward with you, you're going to be cooperating with all local agents and showcasing their home just as prominently to them as to consumers, working, and cooperating with them. But their home is going to compete with other properties that are currently on the market that a buyer may consider purchasing if they were considering that property. And that's something they need to understand. Sell them on your aggressive approach. We offer by far the most aggressive marketing campaign in the market. And so again, going back to being able to articulate those things and being consistent about your engagement with those things is going to help you sell them on the aggressive approach. Our company investments are primarily designed to direct as many leads as possible to you, the listing agent. And that is something you want to be able to articulate because you are the most motivated to sell that house for your client. And so we're doing all of those things to help direct those leads back to you, the listing agent. All right. They need to feel that you will fight for them. Isn't that true? To get the best price and terms. Any suggestions made now are only going to support your goal of getting the house sold. So that's you fighting for them. Have you ever had a client comment or heard agents talking about clients commenting that they felt that you were working harder for the other agent or buyer than you were working for them? Have you ever heard that? And sometimes that comes as the result of a argumentative approach to speaking with the seller. And you don't want to put yourself in an argumentative situation with the seller. You need them to know that while you're giving them advice and the tips that you're giving to help them make it successfully to the closing table are in their best interest. You don't want to pit it you against them. You want to make sure they understand you're fighting for them and you're on their side. But it is common for them to have those feelings. That's especially hard when you do personally feel like perhaps your seller is being unreasonable. You got to be able to work through that. Okay, marketing today comes down to 3 words: range, reach, and influence. Because of the internet, the web, and IDX, you no longer have to worry about range and reach. You pretty much can tell these clients their listing is going to be displayed on every major real estate site regardless. One of the things that you want to make sure you position is that it's going to be positioned in its best light by you, their aggressive marketing agent, right? The entire world isn't going to get to see your property in all of its glory. The entire world is going to get to see your property in all of its glory. It's going to be everywhere. And which is why it needs to look its best on day one of hitting the market, right? And it's good to be able to throw in there how many times you see homes come online that aren't in their best light on day one, correct? And that can really impact the launch to a listing. So we don't have to worry about range and reach because other companies are going to market your property just as if you also listed with them. This is true. The property is just as much going to be on Century 21, on Coldwell Banker, on RE/MAX's websites as it is ours. So any of those agents that are working with buyers that are searching online, those buyers a lot of times are also looking on sites like Zillow and Realtor.com. So you're going to be reaching buyers that are working with agents from all companies, and their listing will be exposed to all of those agents as well. You want to make sure you articulate the extra things we do to reach those agents, like our highly networked realtor open houses, where you partner with someone like Matt Houston did with Dino yesterday to have that broker open house. Our e-cards that we have distribution lists for Dothan, Enterprise, Eufaula agents to really reach those agents as well directly. How you give extra attention to your MLS emails, making sure the links work and that all the information is there. It's okay to say you wouldn't believe how many emails I get from the MLS that forgot to put the property address or what time the open house was going to be, or it didn't even have a clickable link to the property, right? Those are all things that make a huge difference, and yet you see it every day that attention to detail is not given, right? The whole key is how can we influence the buyers and the buyers' agents? And that's why I want to go over the strategy for that. So you're going to be using strategies to make sure you influence buyers and the buyer agent. Alan Dalton uses this. He has a lot of no words, and comp is one of his no words. You don't want to use the word comp. And why? By the way, why don't we start off by taking a look at some comparable children to yours, right? It's not about comparable to yours. it instantly breaks the rapport, right? You're automatically, disconnecting with the seller by saying comp. 50% of the listings you lose are because you're not in rapport. So, folks, why don't we take a look at properties that buyers will be evaluating at the same time they're evaluating your home? Have you ever had a seller that was sensitive because you did compare their home to another one that had either recently sold or was recently on the market? Well, I know that home, or they may even know the owner. Well, that's Sally's home, and that home didn't have this or this or this, or that home was a mess. I mean, I've had them go to town on why their home was better than the comp that I suggested. But what you can do is express to them that we're going to be marketing your property in a pool where there are other homes competing with theirs on the market. And so we want to talk about the things that are going to make their home stand out when competing with those other homes. So this is good for the comp of a sold property. Based on recent buyer behavior, where do you think we should price your home? So when you're looking at comparable sales, you're referring to that as recent buyer behavior. You're looking at homes that made it all the way to successful close and average stats on those. What is there that the buyer might try to use against us in negotiation? This is a big one. So when you're walking through the property, you're helping putting the seller onto those things. And it's good if you can get the seller to acknowledge things in their home they think they need to improve. I recently had one that was doing this as well, where he walked me to, I do have some wood rot on this back here that I'm meaning to improve, or, I've been really thinking that maybe I should update this bathroom before we list. What do you think? So by positioning it this way, what is there that the buyer might try to use against us in negotiation? You're asking the seller to identify those areas that need to be addressed. And that puts you in a better place of control there. And what I also like to express to sellers when we're talking about this is buyers often associate a greater dollar value for an improvement than it would actually cost for the improvement. And that is hands down across the board the case. Yep. Even if it comes to just painting the house, right? Oh, that's going to cost $10,000. It's almost like $10,000 is the rule of thumb, because everything's going to cost $10,000. Anyway, so some pricing strategies. Number one, as we start talking about pricing, what percentage of realtors, in your opinion, when it comes to pricing their personal home, would overprice their home? Common, you think?
Number one,
95%.
Never.
What percentage of those realtors who overprice their personal home have access to all the data?
All of them.
They all do, right? So they're trying to achieve the same thing as your clients. So what percentage of homeowners before you arrive already have a price in mind? Do you think that they've already talked about it a little bit? Absolutely. Yep. So let's talk about not shooting the messenger. So having that price in mind, one thing I've become more sensitive to when going to these appointments is the suggested price range and even my net sheet that I include in the marketing proposal. So there are times when I won't even take those pages if I'm really unsure of how far off I am, because it can be a instant break of rapport, if you will, if I present that information at a point where they're not ready for it even. It doesn't mean we're not going to go there. It doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it, but it means that if I put it in writing and they see those numbers at the wrong point in my proposal, they could shut down because now we've instantly disconnected. The other thing is just being sensitive to where in that range we're going to end up. And just I've really put it more on sellers that ultimately it is their decision where to price their home, because it is their home and their investment. So I want them to know that I'm not going to force feed a price on them, but I am going to give my best recommendation and feedback and listen to theirs as well, right? So when it comes to the information, you want to make sure they don't shoot the messenger. And this is going to play into it all along the way. Showing feedback expectations, don't shoot the messenger. I had one recently asking me, did I get feedback from the showing agent? I was embarrassed to say all I got was nice house, right? Nice house. Do you think the seller wanted a little bit more? Yes.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure, again, with you're on their side, express that yes, you are trying to get that feedback, and please understand that sometimes that is all you get, right? So it is a important conversation to have. Same with low offers, preparing them for the don't shoot the messenger if you receive a low offer, or feedback from those broker open houses, right? Sometimes you get the I didn't like the paint color, or there's a smell and there's only one agent that mentioned there was a smell, or whatever it is, you prepare them for that kind of feedback. So this talks about the lowest level of value is information, then data, then comes knowledge and wisdom. I thought this was really great. And I think this is really great, especially with regard to agency services. And I thought about this even on the buyer side. So the lowest level of value is information, then data, then comes knowledge and wisdom. So let's talk about a science of pricing, okay? So some of your homeowners may want to use the pricing strategy where they use data to come up with the closest price possible for the property, right? Looking at your market analysis. Another strategy would be the less is more pricing strategy. I like to use, and I do use this very often when I'm going over a market analysis, how relocation companies systematically like to price homes 10% below market value because they're not in the business of holding on to that inventory for too long. So they do choose the less is more strategy very often on a relocation property to help move it more quickly. A lot of times, again, price is going to control the speed of the sale. Listing strategy 3, some of our clients like what I refer to as a retail pricing strategy. And let's maybe best describe that as not overpricing, but a achievable sale price that is above our average data for pricing, but with some room for reasonable concessions and that the market could realistically respond to. So there's your retail pricing strategy. And so of these 3 strategies, what makes the most sense to you given the circumstances? So you present each strategy to your prospective seller and ask them to tell you which strategy works best for them. So let's go back here. We've reviewed the market information based on the data. Are you going with based on our average price per foot of these have sold, based on the size of your home, that would put us at a price of this. Does that sound like a great price for you? Or is it, let's be a little more aggressive of pricing because we have a time sensitive move that we're trying to plan around and we really need to be out of here? Or is it, let's not overprice it, but let's start at an achievable price with some room for reasonable concessions through negotiating, and give them the option. So now you've tenderized the homeowner to one of these strategies. And again, you are not representing the data, you are representing them. So you want to keep the focus on what's best for the client and let them make a decision based on the information you've reviewed with them. Most of them hate the data, so you really don't want to be associated with the data. Does that make sense? You don't want to be tied to the data. That's back to that. Don't shoot the messenger. So you want to associate yourself with their vision and needs versus the data, and keep bringing those things back into focus as you have conversation with the seller. I don't want to help you select the highest possible price. I want to help you select the highest realistic price. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going for the highest possible price. We want the highest realistic price.
Good.
I don't want to have your home on the market. We need to make sure it's in the market. So this is articulating there's a difference between just putting it online and in the MLS and putting it out there in a way that has it competitive with homes in that price range.
Love it.
And so there are a lot of don't says. And if you remember recently in the mastermind group, we posted an article of no words. It was in the mastermind group. And so words we don't want to use are we can give it a try. It's kind of high, but we can give it a try. When you go with the higher price, you don't want to refer to it as a try, right? The try makes it sound like you've already given up on that price. Just like, sometimes we have that conversations with sellers about how they don't want to test the market and the downsides for testing the market. So I do let my owners know that when they set the price, we are going to go aggressively toward that price. But what we're also going to be prepared to do is react quickly if we don't get the results they were looking for at that price. Does that make sense? So it's not trying that price. We're going to go for it. And if we're not getting the results the owner wanted, which the owner wants showings, right? And the owner wants a contract. And so if we're not getting those things, we need to have a backup plan in place for what's the next step and how quickly are we going to make those changes. And what you want to be prepared to do is even at this appointment, go ahead and have that plan outlined and mapped out. So, okay, we're going to start at this price. This is a little higher than than where we thought we might start, but let's do this. Let's have a plan in place to make an adjustment after the first few weeks if we're not getting showing activity. So if we don't have the kind of showing activity we're looking for by this date, could we reduce to this price? And go ahead and get them to agree to that. You can even go ahead and get that in writing so that you don't have to chase that price adjustment down once you make it to that date. I've had pricing strategies before where I had the next 2 price adjustments already agreed to in writing with effective dates and net sheets to go along with them so that they were ready to go if the house had not sold by that date. My motivation is to help extract every conceivable penny from the marketplace for your home. What do you think? My motivation is to help extract every conceivable penny from the marketplace for your home. I'm going to give both of you a piece of paper and ask you to write down the 3 to 5 major reasons why someone would want to acquire this lifestyle. Okay, so why would we do this? Right? You want to make sure that you're highlighting those key features that your sellers love about their home. They've been in the home in some cases a very long time, and they know what things are great about the home for them. This can really help you create your story too when working on your listing description. So if they can paint a picture of how they live in the house, you can use that to help you write your story for the property. The other thing it helps you do is not miss key features that your seller expects to see in your write-up. Because if you haven't had this conversation, you're more likely to miss it when you do your write-up and the property comes online. And not just with the write-up, but with the photos. If there are those key features that are missing when it comes online, your seller is going to be disappointed that they didn't see this thing that they really connect with in their home presented in the way they wanted it presented. One easy example, I have a client who really wanted and is consistent about making sure I highlight that there are outlets in the drawer of her island. And I think that was sensitive to her because they're in an untraditional place. They're in the back of the drawers of the island. But for a lot of people, it's important to have that there for when you have those entertainment parties and you have a crock pot and you want it an easy setup for that football party that you have access to it. But she's going to be very disappointed if I'm not effectively communicating to the showing agents and online that she has that feature in her home.
Yep.
You're more valuable because you're defending them. So you want to make sure, again, that you're on their side and you're defending the features of their home. They need to feel that that's what you're doing. How important do you think the way the buyers will be shown your property is going to be? Do you think it's important the way an agent shows the property? What's an example we can think of for how we would show the property the right way?
Well, I think about our client that we had, Mr. M, over in River Edge. And he would complain because he was one of those sellers that you really never really appreciated because they wouldn't leave during showings. But he would go out on the back patio and he would watch the agents go through the house. And, in his mind, they were just door openers. They didn't do anything. And that's one of the reasons why he insisted on being there, is because he was afraid that they weren't actually going to showcase his home adequately and tell people all about it. So, we did a book that we left inside the front door that would help people, be guided through the property. But I think, you don't want to go and say the Vanna White, here's the kitchen, here's the living room, blah, blah, blah. But he wanted to see people pointing out all the good stuff. And I guess in his past, he had just not experienced that.
I had an experience where I was kind of, happy to show my buyers this particular house, because when we got there, the sellers had a book of when the house, when they purchased the house, and then pictures of all the improvements and a list typed out for everyone to pretty much take with them, not the book, but just a list of items. And it was just different from just having a MLS sheet. You can actually see the visual of how the house kind of transitioned, since they had it.
That's exactly right. And so even a few of our new listings and this one that came on today, when that features list exceeds the character count for your listing description, you do need to create something that paints the total picture, right? You need to have a resource that you can give them that really highlights all the features of the home. And so I've even saved those as like a screenshot that I'll send before showing. And so I'll text it to the showing agent and make sure they have it in that way. But other ways that this is common are starting from how we enter the home. How often do you have the conversation about putting the lockbox on the front door versus coming in through the side door, or having all the lights and lamps on for a showing and getting your seller to partner with you in that effort, so that if you're not the one showing the house, if they're at all able to, that you have all those lights and lamps on for the showing, because the house is going to show better that way. Alita, for example, is one of the queens of turning lights and lamps on. I can tell you with some of these big ones she's had, how many times she has run over, even before another agent showed the house, turning on all the lights and lamps in these big giant homes. And it's just something I know has been a signature of hers for a long time. So it's an important conversation to have with your sellers. Let me go back to this. 100% focus. Make it all about them. There's a major difference between a salesperson and a closer. So let's talk about this. Now we're going to be talking a little bit more about getting the listing and how to close out that conversation, right? You really do have to ask for the business, even if it's breaking out of that comfort zone, right? Hundreds of thousands of realtors have lost listings because they end it. They'll say, "Do you have any questions?" That's the end of the meeting, right? The second thing a lot of realtors say is, "When would you like to get started?" And the third thing that a lot of realtors say that will lose them the listing is, "Boy, I'd really love to represent you," right? It's just not very call to action specific. So let's start with, do you have any questions? I'm guilty of this one. I have been, at the end of it, I'm like, there's the awkward pause at the end of the presentation. I wasn't sure what to say next. This was a very common, comfortable thing for me to say. So do you have any questions? Is there any, is there any other information you may need before you make a decision?
That's good.
How about, all I have is one last question. How soon would you like to have your beautiful home sold to the right buyer? So, that might be a little past your cheesy meter, but something more aggressive that talks about how soon would they like to have their home sold. And I use this very commonly, explaining how quickly we could have their home on the market is we're pretty much ready as soon as you're ready for us to come and capture photos and video, right? The listing paperwork doesn't take any time at all. Right. So we're truly ready as soon as they're ready for us to come through their house and capture the quality photo and video content that we need to really showcase their house online. And that really puts them in preparation mode. They start thinking, oh, okay, now it's on me. When can I be ready? Right. And they may say, well, we're not in a hurry. Well, that's great. We can go ahead and get started and we don't have any time pressure. Right. If they don't want to list today, that's absolutely fine. If you have 3 months, boy, that just means we're going to be even extra prepared when the home comes online. But it still means that you can have those plans in place, suggestions of improvements they're going to complete before we come online, a plan for when you are going to go and get property photos and the 3D tour, and go ahead and date your listing agreement for that date when they plan to come online. And if that date happens to change, you can get that agreement changed in writing, but at least you have a firm plan in place and everybody's moving in the same direction, right? It brings a sense of urgency. All right, so let's talk about stop volunteering to cut commission, right? So I think that when the conversation comes up, sometimes we're ready to throw in the towel too early in that process. And I can tell you at the time that you're taking the listing is typically always too early in the process because you're not even negotiating with a qualified buyer at this point. They haven't even listed the house. And so it is good to have those conversations with your sellers about once we list the property too, setting that expectation that after this point, where you're not negotiating with me, we're going to be negotiating with the prospective buyer and their agent. The other reason that's important, and I thought about this recently when I had an exchange with the seller who was going straight for the commission, right? Think about the position that puts you in with your client if they're now negotiating with you on commission while you're negotiating with a buyer. Isn't the most important thing to work out a deal at that point with buyer and seller? And do you think the agent is going to have a harder time having the seller's best interest in mind when now you've put me against client seller? Does that make sense? Now it's me against you. We're supposed to be on the same team and not negotiating against each other. We're supposed to be trying to help reach an agreement with this buyer. So stop volunteering to cut the commission. When they bring it up, don't panic. Don't let your heart sink down into your stomach and like, oh, here it is. Here we go. I don't know if I can do this. This is too much. Be calm. And number one, be in your mindset. Confidence is key. Being able to articulate, your services is key. Just because fees are negotiable does not mean you have to negotiate your fee. That's an important thing to remember as you go into an appointment. Commission is really nothing more than a marketing carrot. One thing I think is important about the marketing side and the listing side is it seems so often that we do discount that side, even though in most cases that's where more of the expense and effort is placed in marketing and promoting the property. So being able to articulate that is also important. This goes back to preparing the seller for negotiations, but having that conversation, is there anything about the property that you think a buyer agent might try to discount in terms of the price? A good way to have that conversation of sometimes we're going to be making comparisons and your fee cut versus a fee cut a buyer is going to try to place on a proposed improvement. So we may be talking about a measly $1,500 of a commission cut versus a $10,000 price adjustment that you may make because of some property condition down the road. There's a much more, there's a big gap between the perception of our fee versus fees that are going to be negotiated down the road. And that's something to keep in mind and in perspective. And they don't buy the plane, they buy the destination. And I just think it's also important to keep focus on, at the end of the day, it's all about the bottom line to the seller, and you're protecting that bottom line amount. So, you know, they're not buying into all of your flashy marketing plan and promises of this price. At the end of the day, it is still about getting them all the way to successful close with a bottom line number that they are happy and comfortable with. The destination is selling their home for the highest price possible, right? That's the destination. Making sure you assure the owner your home is completely distinctive, and that's how we've got to market it. So you want to make sure they know you find value in all of the features of that home, and that's what we're going to showcase. And then at the end of the marketing proposal, and you have your contract ready to sign, you turn it around and you hand them a pen and you be quiet. Give them a moment to process and decide if they're ready to sign. But you have it ready to go. Your goal is to close 98.2% of your sellers to win the listing, right? And what's important to do is to role play and practice your proposal before you go, because to be able to work on the fly and read the mood of the room and read the emotions of the sellers, you can't be so stuck on reading your marketing proposal page by page. You have to know going into it what you want to say and what key points are important to make sure you cover in at the appointment, but not be so tied to a narrative and a script that you have trouble breaking from that as required by the mood of the room and by the interaction with your sellers. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes.
You have to stop leaving money on the table.
So, Tim,
Yes.
I know this is all about the savvy seller. I just wanted to know, is there a time where it's appropriate to not take the listing?
There is, but I will tell you this. So let's run through a few scenarios, if you will. Okay. One scenario I can give you is a time when I had a past client refer their parents to me, and I did the marketing proposal for their parents. And based off the information and the data that I was so tied to at the time, they wanted to price the home higher than I felt I could sell it for. And at that appointment, I made the judgment call that, well, I tell you what, I mean, I just don't feel like I can help you reach that goal at that price. So, you know, if we're that far apart, I'd have to pass on the listing. And you know what? They got a cash buyer from Ohio with another agent, and that bad boy sold in like 2 weeks. So, lesson learned to me. But what it was also a lesson for me about is that I don't have that crystal ball to say for absolute certainty that there's not a buyer at a price perhaps a little higher than where we are. But what you want to make sure you're able to do is work with the client on that plan if it's not working out. And you do have to be able to gauge your personal investment in it of time and effort if that's going to be good. But in that case, I wish I had allowed the seller to set their price and me give it my best effort, because they valued their home, and I didn't value their home as much as they did. And I was wrong in that case, right? There are other times when perhaps it's a personality disconnect or a demand disconnect that you're not going to be able to achieve. We've had clients in the past that had expectations of their agents. I know agents in the office had about being there for every showing, or strict showing language that was going to restrict access to the home to an unreasonable extent, or just a general, you're arguing with everything I say, we're not gelling. I mean, if there's a point where you just feel like you're not going to be able to serve that client in an effective manner, you do have to be able to pass on it, right? If you can't take it for your mental health, right, your effort may be better spent in another direction than agonizing over that. But I do think we have to get to a skillful place where we're able to deal with the emotions of those clients, because it's not completely uncommon that you have a difficult client. Does that make
So I'm
sense?
thinking like no shouldn't be your first answer for sure.
For sure.
Right.
Right.
Well, and I've had challenging folks where I've said, well, let's talk about these issues, especially, I used to work at expireds heavily, which we don't have many expireds to work lately, but with an expired, they've already kind of worn everybody else out. And obviously whatever strategy they took didn't work the first 2-3 times, however many. And so, when you're going in from that perspective, you want to be more of a problem solver. But if they want to continue to do the same thing over again and expect a different result, then you have to decide if that's going to be you 400 and some odd days later, because obviously that's what happened with these other situations and it on an expired. But and the other thing is, sometimes you get a sense that people can be abusive, and I don't ever encourage an agent to take a listing where you're going to be in a really abusive situation. And you can kind of get that vibe early on, and a lot of us try to ignore it because we think, well, maybe it'll be a good enough listing to offset that. But sometimes after, in hindsight, we look back and say, whew, maybe I should have just left that hornet's nest alone. And and I've enjoyed particularly turning around some challenging critters and really helping them in spite of themselves sometimes, because sometimes folks can be their own worst enemy, trying to create all these demands that really can't be met. But I don't encourage anybody to ever put up with being talked down to or abused or, treated in a belligerent manner. And so if you get any kind of sense of that, life's too short for that. So.
Well, and really 2 other examples, sometimes I've had Sphere tell me, well, they had so-and-so that they wanted to refer me, but that person was really difficult and they didn't want to refer me their difficult friend. And I said, well, hold on a second. Let's not go ahead and, automatically qualify what level of difficult Tim can take, right? You don't know my Tosh spice level, right? I got a high spice tolerance here. The other thing is, I have had clients that were difficult to the extreme, and I had to do a lot of mental therapy on not internalizing the things I was dealing with. It's not my monkey, right? And realizing, like Mom said, helping them in spite of themselves. And then also realizing, like, well, if not me, who else is going to help them through this? Because let's say, based on the situation, these folks are gone to another state regardless. They're going to have to sell this house. So somebody's going to have to help them through this thing, you know. And you just have to be okay with it at the end of the day. If that unpleasable client, you did get them to the finish line, but they weren't ready to give you that 5-star review on Zillow. But you know what? You weren't expecting that 5-star review by then anyway, because it's not in their nature. It wasn't going to be something that you achieved with that particular client.
But you can cash the check.
That's right. And take pride in the fact that you really did get it done. Even if they didn't thank you for it, you know what? That's me taking care of a difficult situation.
Good.
Other questions?
I think this is really good. I guess my weakness is maybe the confidence part for people that I don't know. Like if I know them, then my confidence level is way higher, because it's just because you just don't know what to expect from somebody that you do not know. And so building that rapport at the beginning is something that I just need to practice, because sometimes I'm so, like you said, so caught up in the presentation itself, and you don't know that person, but you haven't I haven't taken any time to actually build the rapport that I need so they can actually listen. And, you know, I've gotten listings even when I felt like they weren't listening, but just feeling confident, like regardless of whether I got it or not, I know that I did my best. I was confident. I built rapport. So I'm definitely going to, like I said, practice just not reading like page by page, because sometimes what I've done late on my last listings, I've just summarized what I'm about to say. So that kind of helped the buyers know like what to look forward to in this book that I'm giving them. So I'm just going to practice.
That's a great lead in to the other tools that they have for this program and really how we approach our marketing proposal. I would say I am the exact same way, where that's how I feel going into a presentation with someone I don't know. I think what helps me is experience from doing it so many times, right? It's that 10,000 hours, but the consistency of it is also super important, because I do it the same way every time, whether it's somebody I know or I don't know. I mean, when I talk about that pre-listing appointment and then the listing appointment and how my proposal's set up, it's the same every time, so that I am that comfortable with it. And that gains me a tremendous advantage when I go into that meeting with more confidence. So on the marketing proposal side, they've provided kind of a short proposal that is all about keeping it simple. If you look at the full marketing proposal that Berkshire Hathaway Home Services provides, or that's in Toolkit, all of those pages are probably way too much, right? All of those pages are way too much. So what you need to do is spend time preparing your listing presentation, your marketing proposal to a level that you're comfortable with, but that is also concise enough to cover what's needed to cover without being too long, and focus on the right things. What I love about the leave behind in the book is that the book shows effort and attention to their house. But we're not going to go page by page through the book. You're going to leave the book because they can go through it at their leisure if they want to. And if they don't even, it's going to sit there as a Cabernet logo on their couch. You know what I mean? When people come through the house, and a reminder. So, because they're not going to throw that thing in the trash. So if that's all it ends up, great. If they decide to thumb through it and read line by line, great. That's their personality. If we just cover the basics and they're comfortable with that, also great. But
the other thing that gives you confidence is, and this is one of the reasons why I love Brian Buffini so much, is that when you build your business based on referrals from people you know and people, your previous clients and things like that, then every stranger's home you go into, essentially, is already a warm lead because they were referred to you by somebody who did already know you and have great confidence in you. And in fact, they had so much confidence in you that they referred you to their
Right.
friend. And so you already have street cred, so to speak. When you go in and meet with them, you get that the respect that carries over from their relationship by word of mouth in that way. And just like trying a restaurant, you know, if somebody speaks highly of a restaurant, you're much more likely to go and try it than somebody says, oh, I have a great experience there. Well, then, you know, there are other choices for places to go eat, right? But so I think it gives you a lot of extra confidence when you develop that kind of business as opposed to somebody who's heavily working FSBOs, for instance, you know, because for sale by owners are like cold business,
Hearted.
you know. And but when you really work with your sphere, then you're doing a whole different kind of business more often than not, you know. And that is, it's easier to go in and get that business because you feel confident already and they feel relaxed with you already. It's almost yours to lose at that point. You know what I mean? So
I think for me, like my sphere, are mostly people who have not owned homes or whatever, and they don't know a lot of people that own their own home as well. So a lot of my referrals come from people from buyers, basically. So I'm trying to figure out how to get those sellers.
Awesome.
well, and there aren't enough expireds these days to work with.
There's hard. I know. It's like one or two every now and then.
Yep.
Well, you know, really the next thing would be to spend that effort working on your marketing proposal and really customizing your process. But if you need any one-on-one help with that, let me know. And if you want to talk through the process, if you have an appointment, let me know. You know, those are all things that we can help with. But I just, you know, the pre-appointment and the marketing proposal appointment, those are key steps, and you just want to be prepared for each of those in a different way.
Yep.
And
I've enjoyed this training. Thank you.
the thing to remember too with the toolkit and the formal marketing proposal is that when you do this consistently for listings, almost every time you're going to hear somebody tell you, wow, you did a lot of work. Wow, nobody's ever done all this for me before. Wow. And that's the kind of reaction that you want to have. And so
That's how you mesmerize.
That's how you mesmerize. You got to bring your A game every single time, even with people you know, because
And especially
even if
with
you know and especially because you're trying to cultivate those referrals, and if you really wow them, then it really confirms why they went with you and didn't pick some random person. And you know, they deserve to have you put on the dog for them as well. So
well, and I have seen just an example I'll give many times where the friend agent took the casual approach, even though they had the ability to mesmerize and do, but the friend took the casual approach because they had this one in the bag, and it created a negative experience for that client because if it didn't sell and all you gave it was that casual approach, they're going to come firing back at you with, well, she didn't do anything. And they didn't, you know, all they did was put the sign up. So it just creates a potentially very negative reaction then with a sphere, then with a friend that you really want to avoid. So, Awesome. Well, I appreciate y'all joining Zoom and Learn. I'm glad we were able to finally
Mhm.
have it after a tropical storm, hurricane, whatever, Sally coming through and last week. And so we look forward to our next one. And if you need help with your marketing proposals and your presentation, just let us know.
Thanks, Tim. You did great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. See you later.
Thanks, Tim.
Good ideas.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.